My name is Dino Wu. As Lucy said, I'm one of John C.H. Wu's grandchildren. My father was Francis Wu, who was number 7 out of 13, so it's right in the middle of the lineup. I want to actually recognize my uncle Vincent is here. My uncle Vincent was number 9. It's hard to keep straight sometimes. I was one of only 5 grandchildren who lived in Taiwan during the last, let's call it, decade and a half of my grandfather's life. So I saw him on a regular basis, which is, in retrospect, quite a treat. And I was the last grandchild to see him about a week before he passed away in the hospital in 1986. I was only 13 at the time. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about my grandfather and his influence on my own path through life. And I'm going to use music as a unifying theme. For me, it's a way to link 3 generations. I'm going to explore some of my grandfather's thoughts on music, recount some anecdotes about the role of music in his life. I will sing a couple of songs myself. And my father began studying piano in his teenage years in Rome when my grandfather was the ambassador, the minister to the Holy See, the ambassador to the Vatican from China in the late 40s. And he remained in, my father remained in Rome for 10 years, even after my grandfather left that post and became a professional classical pianist. Now, he passed away 17 years ago and would have been 89 this year. So in honoring my grandfather today, I'm also honoring my father. And I want to point out that my pianist today is Yung-Chen, who was one of my dad's students in Taiwan. Very, very good. She's a fabulous pianist. She lives and teaches and performs in Philadelphia. As for music in my own life, I'll say more about that later. But for now, it suffices to say I'm in some ways an amalgam of my grandfather and my father. I went to law school and became a practicing lawyer, but I'm also a classically trained singer, and at one point I walked away from law practice to try to sing opera. I'm very conflicted. So in my remarks today, I decided that to talk about music and then to sing some songs would please my grandfather to no end if he were sitting here today. By singing during a speech, I think I'm doing something that I could very well imagine him doing, as one of my anecdotes later will show. It allows me to express my love and abiding affection and respect for him and what he stood for in a way that mere words might fail to do. And also, by singing, I am embracing my own authenticity. In preparing these remarks, I reread some of my Uncle John's writings. My Uncle John was number 13, and a scholar, truly a scholar about my grandfather in his own right. He couldn't be here today. But I reread some of his writings, including a truly remarkable essay called Centennial Vignettes, Life with Father. And I was inspired by so many passages that described how deeply my grandfather valued authenticity, genuineness, the realization of the whole person, and cultivation of your divinely ordained gifts. So I'm going to go ahead and sing my first song. Written by Franz Liszt. It's a setting of a sonnet by the 14th century poet Petrarca, who many credit with being the father of humanism and the Italian Renaissance itself. My grandfather, in many ways, was the epitome of the Renaissance man, in the diversity of his interests and in the way that the extraordinary breadth of his scholarship was constantly looking backward at Chinese roots to revive cultural treasures. And this poem is called I vidi in terra angelici costumi, or I saw on earth angelic qualities.
Celesti bellezze al mondo sole, al che di rimembrar mi giova ed ole, che quante io miro par sogni, ombre fatto mille volte invidia al sole ed udi sospirando dir parole che farian giri monti e strade i cielo
words. And actually, I'm going to give you the translation. In English, it comes to, I saw on earth angelic qualities and heavenly beauties unique in the world, so that the memory pleases and pains me. For whatever I look on seems dreams, shadows, and smoke. And I saw these two beautiful lights weeping that have 1,000 times made the sun envious. And I heard amid sighs words that would make mountains move and rivers stand still. Love, wisdom, worth, piety, and sorrow made weeping a sweeter music than any other to be heard in the world. And the heavens were so intent upon the harmony that no leaf on any branch was seen to move. So much sweetness filled the air and the wind. Don't ask me why, but when I read that, I think of my grandfather. Something about the words, the way Petrarch rhapsodized about his Laura, reminds me of the way my grandfather would wax poetic about basically everything. His writings on jurisprudence and legal philosophy are unusual because they have a poetic lyrical quality. They were never dry philosophical discourses. And believe me, I've read plenty of dry legal writing. And indeed, I would argue that he was a poet trapped in a lawyer's body for the first half of his life. And it's fitting, his first published book, published in 1936, this was before his conversion to Catholicism. It was entitled The Art of Law. Not just some law stuff, the art of law. In one passage from that book, he writes, "The evolution of music from melody to harmony is symbolic of the development of human society and the growth of man's inner life. But the most painful moments are those in which melody is gone and harmony is yet to be achieved. For in those moments, we have only discord, which is neither melodious nor harmonic. This explains why, in times of transition, tender-minded philosophers so often wish to return to nature, craving, as it were, after the lost melody." In Beyond East and West, his autobiography, published in 1951, he wrote, "At present, the soul of China is undergoing the most painful period in her history. Melody is over and harmony is yet to be. She is now in the midst of heart-rending discord. In my own case, God has resolved all the discord for me and infused the supernatural harmony into my soul. But when will this happen to my country and my people? My own harmony can never be complete so long as this does not happen, so long as discords are still raging in the world." This idea of harmony runs through so much of his writing. In another passage from an essay, "The Individual in Chinese Political Tradition," he wrote about the East and the West. He wrote this in 1968. "The East and the West, each instinctively seeks each other for its completion and fulfillment. Let us therefore treasure their differences, for without differences, they would not be able to enrich each other. And let us also treasure their essential openness, their oneness, without which their existential differences would not be able to evolve into a harmony. But thanks to their real unity and their real diversity, there is great reason to hope that all their bewildering multiplicity of cultural processes can be an inexhaustible source of counterpoint to feed an ever-expanding and ever-deepening symphony of humanity, in which unity becomes infinitely vital and rich, and diversity acquires eternal meaning and significance." So, that was a lot of serious talk. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this infused his daily life. My father once recalled, when he rejoined the family here up in New Jersey, that his father often asked him detailed questions about musical terms and music theory, occasionally leaving him stumped. My father had already studied music for at least a decade at that point. One day he tried looking up the answer in the Encyclopedia Britannica in the family library and realized that his father had already read through the entire section on music theory, taking detailed notes with his blue and red pencils on terms like counterpoint and harmony. So he beat him to it. My grandfather's interest in music was not merely academic, though. He loved to sing. My father liked to recount this story about how my grandfather, when he was a student in Paris around 1922, loved going to the opera. And once he started to sing that famous aria, La Donna è mobile, from Rigoletto, at the top of his lungs, in the middle of the night in his dorm room in Paris. And the next day he found a note on his door, attached to his door, asking him please to stick with the law and leave the singing to the singers. I don't know if this is true or not, but my dad tells me that the author of the note was none other than Zhou Enlai, who was himself studying in Paris at the time and would end up, of course, becoming a major figure in the Chinese government. My dad also told me about this drafting session involving something very important. And by important, I mean drafting the national constitution of the Republic of China, or some treaty. But the various constituents could not come to an agreement on some major point. So, and this was after hours of argument. So my grandfather got up and asked everyone to join him in singing a song, and they did that. After the song, they were finally able to break the logjam and make progress on their draft. I kind of wonder if that would have worked over the past week, just down the street. My grandfather was apparently quite serious about Chinese opera and had an entire set of costumes in his wardrobe back in Shanghai so that his friends could come over and put on performances in their house. He sang Chinese opera to himself to relieve homesickness when he traveled abroad. Later in life, after the passing of my grandmother in New Jersey, he sang in his study for hours at a time, at least partly to console himself. And in his essay, The Spirit of Joy in Chinese Sages, my grandfather wrote, according to the Chinese way of thinking, music is joy and joy is music, because both of them are essentially bound up with the idea of harmony. He pointed out that joy and music are represented by the same character in Chinese, and when it is intended to mean music, it's pronounced yue. When it's intended to denote joy, it's pronounced le, but it's the same character. And he wrote this: joy comes from the perfect realization of one's personality, which in turn depends on the achievement of interior harmony. As music is the art of harmony par excellence, it is little wonder that the ancient Chinese sages laid such emphasis on the cultivation of music as a means of developing the human personality. And so now this brings me to the last part of this presentation. When you listen to those phrases, the realization of one's personality and the achievement of interior harmony. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my grandfather's influence on me as a role model. Over 20 years ago, at the occasion of, I guess what was then the 10th anniversary of his passing, I wrote an essay about how I had followed him into the law because I was so bedazzled by his success in that realm. His friendships with the U.S. Supreme Court justices, Oliver Holmes, Benjamin Cardozo, Felix Frankfurter, countless other legal giants of the 20th century. The fact that he was the principal draftsman of the Chinese Constitution. And in that essay, I described my alarm. It was really alarm. Well, I was in law school at the time, that I had followed that path into the law without really understanding whether it was something that I really wanted, and whether I would also turn away from the practice of law as he had. His life path is a very difficult one to hold up as a role model for himself. We'll find out more about him during the talks later. But first he achieved extraordinary success as a lawyer and as a legal scholar in a way that humbles me every time I think about it. But then he turned away from all of that worldly materialistic success after his conversion to Catholicism. And his most fruitful and productive time came after that. And his enduring legacy comes from the second half of his life. We wouldn't be gathered here today if my grandfather had remained a practicing lawyer. I mean, you might be here anyway, but we wouldn't be celebrating him in the way that we are. You know, when one thinks of role models, we often think of more one-dimensional characters who are exemplars in their chosen profession. In the field of law, for example, I could see a young lawyer looking up to some, famous trial lawyer that they admire. My grandfather achieved the height of success and excellence in that field and walked away. In my own life, I had a kind of mini version of this walking away. I practiced law at a big firm in New York for a few years, and then I quit and pursued music for several years, going from making a lot of money doing something I really wasn't enjoying to making no money doing what I really loved to do. I was pursuing a passion. It was a difficult transition, and eventually I realized I wasn't going to be able to make a living doing it. I got married, I wanted to start a family, so I got back into the law practice. But actually I started enjoying what I was doing a lot more because I had that break. But occasionally I look back and I think, well, maybe I should have stuck with it, but that's a different topic. And I have family support, so I'm not going to make any moves myself these days. But I still wonder how my grandfather would have counseled me. I rail against the reality of life, that one generation passes. As the next generation comes. By the time we're mature enough to learn from the wisdom of our ancestors, they're gone. I only overlapped with my grandfather for a brief period when I was only a boy, but I was very fortunate that he left such a rich written legacy. And so preparing these remarks was a real pleasure, as I got to delve into some of his writings as well as writings about him by family members and scholars. I found an interview that my father had given to a classical music magazine in Taiwan in 1986, after his father had passed away. And in it, my father reprinted in full a letter that my grandfather wrote to him in 1950 when my father was still in Italy, and the rest of the family had gone with my grandfather to Hawaii, actually, at that point. And I want to read some excerpts because fatherly advice transcends time. It sounds like my father needed some financial assistance. He was a poor student in Rome, and a bishop, who later became Archbishop Wong, had spoken to a certain Cardinal Montini, who had spoken to the Pope, who had been able to help out my father. This kind of thing happened back then. My grandfather wrote, "Materialism can never suffice. Even if the whole world were given to me, I could not dance for joy. But because so many people had set their minds on helping you, it reminds me of the symphony of the Sacred Heart of Christ. What especially made me happy was the improvement of your spirituality." And later in the letter he wrote, "Since my son is a musician now, I want to give you 2 sentences. 1, let music transform your spiritual life. 2, let your spiritual life transform your music." And finally, in the last part of the letter, he told my father that he was very proud of him for having helped a certain Miss Jing An by giving her some money, even though, of course, my father had very little himself. Maybe he just gave the money that the Pope had given him. Either way, my grandfather wrote, "Your mother and I were full of pride and gratitude. In this life, we must be thrifty and simple toward ourselves and generous toward helping others.
because helping others is giving to God, and living frugally is also giving to God. Only by fulfilling those two virtues can our life become a symphony which pleases God to the utmost. My father said he cherished this letter his whole life, and it gave him guidance for everything he did later. There's a lot of wisdom there. All right, I'm going to end by singing another song, if I still can. I'm talking. This one is by the Italian composer Tosti, and it's called Ideale, or ideal, or perfection in English. It's very close to my heart because it's the last song that my dad played before he passed away. And so I sing it for him and my grandfather. This song expresses our deepest wishes that certain loved ones we've held so dear could be with us. The words translate roughly as, I followed you like a rainbow of peace along the pathways of heaven. I followed you like a friendly torch in the veils of darkness. And I sensed you in the light, in the air, in the perfume of the flowers. And the lonely room was full of you and your splendor. Enraptured, I dreamt at length of the sound of your voice, and every anxiety, every torment of this earth I forgot in that dream. Come back, dear ideal, for an instant. To smile at me again, and in your face will shine for me a new dawn. I think I can do this.
Io ti seguì come ride di pace lungo le vie del cielo. Io ti seguì come un'amica pace nella notte nel velo, e ti senti nella luce, nell'aria, nel profumo dei fiori, e fu piena la stanza solitaria di te e i tuoi splendori. In te rapito al suon della tua voce lungamente sognai, e della terra ogni affanno, ogni croce in quel giorno scordai. Torna, caro ideale, torna un istante a sorridermi ancora, e a me risplenderà nel tuo seno